Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today we are talking about the psychology of pandemics, and we have the perfect guest, the author of The Psychology of Pandemics, Preparing for the Next Global Outbreak of Infectious Disease. Dr. Stephen Taylor is with us. Hi, Dr. Taylor. How are you?
Good, thanks, Tamara. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. Is it okay with you if I call you Stephen?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, great. So you published your book in October of 2019, and I guess I read that your first publisher rejected this book idea of yours.
Yeah.
Why? They didn't think anyone would read it?
Yeah, that was back in July. He said he's published my previous books. He said it's a great idea, but no one's going to want to read this, and rejected it. And I felt really crestfallen. And I thought, no, it's an important book. This pandemics are no one has put all this together. Psychology is hugely important in pandemics. So I found another publisher, and it was, as you said, published in October.
Amazing, and I bet people are scrambling to read it now because we are all fascinated. You know, now that we've been in this for, it feels like forever. I think it's been about 7.5 months. And, we're starting to notice so many things. But before we get into what we're seeing in this pandemic, can you walk us through, the Spanish flu? We just had the 100-year anniversary of that. And are there similarities between what happened then and what's happening now?
There are, and I'm just wondering if I could take things back another 30 years to the Russian flu.
Oh.
Just briefly on the Russian flu, 1889 to 1890. Influenza spread throughout the world as a pandemic. That was the first pandemic in the era of print media and the telegraph. So suddenly people were getting worried about influenza in countries where there were no cases. So people in London were hearing about it in Calcutta, for example, and becoming alarmed. So that was the very start of the news media having an important role in digital interconnectivity. And that fast forward to the Spanish flu, 1918 to about 1920, it was a similar sort of thing where you had all these news reports. However, it was a little different. The Spanish flu was, of course, during World War I, and there were all kinds of news embargoes because the United States was at war with Germany and Britain was at war with Germany. And so this is why it was called the Spanish flu, because only Spain was reporting on the flu. They were trying to suppress reports about all their infantrymen and soldiers getting sick because it affected morale. So,
right.
But aside from that, all of the things we saw that were seen in the Spanish flu are occurring during COVID-19. There was the rise of anticipatory anxiety in countries worrying about the arrival of COVID-19 before there were actually any cases. There was the unfortunate rise of racism, and that's happened in previous outbreaks and pandemics too. There were helplines being flooded by people worried about that they might be infected, so misinterpreting colds and sniffles. And in fact, some hospitals in the United States early on in the pandemic were saying, don't come in if you're sick. Because
Right.
so many false alarms. Had that, and of course we had the panic buying. And of course, during the Spanish flu, there was panic buying of all sorts of toiletries and cleaning things or things that people thought kept themselves safe. There was panic buying back then of Vicks Vapor Rub because people rubbed it on their chest, it helped them breathe, and they thought it kept them safe. There was a rise of quack cures. People were drinking peroxide back then. There are cases of peroxide poisonings based on the misconception, well, if peroxide kills germs, then if I drink it, it must keep me safe. And fast forward 2020, we've got cases of people overdosing on drinking hand sanitizer. The same idea.
Right.
So there were those sorts of things. There were people back then who thought the whole thing was exaggerated. Same here. There was the worried well, people who are highly anxious back then, same we're seeing here. There was even mask rebellion back then. We're seeing all these protests about people not wanting to wear masks. Well, that's old news. It happened in 1919. There was something called the Anti-Mask League was formed in San Francisco because, and the reasons back then are the same reasons today. They said, we don't think masks work and they're a violation of our civil liberties. So
right. So we're predictable. We're
In
a
a
predictable
sense,
bunch, yes.
in a sense, in many ways, yeah, we are.
Wow. Okay, so you wrote about anxiety, depression, racism, this panic buying. It's all happening now. It's really what the research shows that the way we're acting now today is not new. We acted like this 100 years ago when we were faced with a pandemic.
Hmm.
But I guess, did they do things like cheer on the healthcare workers, or is this something that's new? Like, were there positive things that they did back then that we are also doing today?
Yes, there were. In fact, it was interesting. While this COVID-19 pandemic was unfolding, I was watching all the things occur as they'd occurred previously. And early on in March, I thought, well, where's the rise of altruism that we saw in the Spanish flu? I was a little worried that, maybe we're different this time. Maybe we've become cynical and there is no altruism. But then we had the 7 p.m. cheer come up and I was reassured then. So yes, back then there was altruism, and the altruistic response was more common than selfishness or violence or looting or rioting. There were a lot of people were volunteering their time to serve as nursing staff or orderlies, volunteering to bring food to people who were too ill to get out, volunteering to cook for people whose whole families were taken down with the flu who were unable to cook. So there was a lot of altruism back then, just as now, but it was the same kind of conflicted altruism. Just like now, many people who cheer healthcare workers on the safety of their balconies today are actually quite worried about coming into contact with healthcare workers because they're worried about getting infected. So there's that conflict. That was the same back then. People were conflicted about going into homes of sick people. Well, I really want to help my neighbor, but if I go in, I could get the flu, or it was called La Grippe back then, and I could give it to my family. So that conflict existed then as now.
Okay, so what about conspiracy theories? I find this fascinating for a number of reasons, but this to me, we've seen rumblings of conspiracy theories for quite some time. Is this new to people, or did this happen 100 years ago also?
Yeah, it's not new at all. In fact, the conspiracy theories we're seeing today are recycled. They were seen during the 2009 Zika virus pandemic. And Zika was quite mild, except under certain circumstances. For pregnant women, it was dangerous. But during the Zika pandemic, there was a conspiracy theory that it was a manufactured organism created by Monsanto. And we're seeing the same thing today, that it was manufactured. During the SARS outbreak, 2003, there was a conspiracy theory that it was a bioweapon, that coronavirus was manufactured in a lab as a bioweapon. We're seeing that again today here. Go back 100 years ago to the Spanish flu, and as I mentioned, that occurred during World War I. There were conspiracy theories both in the UK and in the United States that it was a bioweapon introduced by the Germans. There was, for example, a piece in the New York Times reporting some health authority claiming that he thought the flu was being brought to New York by Germans on a U-boat who were going into theaters and cinemas spreading the virus. There was also the conspiracy theory that it was being disseminated by Bayer. And Bayer was a formerly German company who sold aspirin in the United States. There was a conspiracy theory that the virus was being embedded in the aspirin tablets. And so actually Bayer had to go out and get their tablets tested to reassure the public.
Wow.
Because there was no virus in there. So
right.
Yeah, conspiracy theories have always been around.
So what is the psychology behind conspiracy theories? Like, what is that? Is it a form of narcissism or something where, we think that it's everyone against us, or we know better? Like, what is it about? Break that down for me.
Yeah, it's complicated. It all starts with rumors. You can think of rumors as being improvised news. We circulate rumors in order to make sense of things that are important to us in our lives. Like there was a rumor early on in the pandemic that if you gargled water infused with garlic, it kept you safe. There was a rumor that smoking kept you safe from the coronavirus, which is not true, by the way. So rumors are ways of dealing with uncertainty about important events, and that's why rumors get spread. Conspiracy theories are like ramped up kinds of rumors. The people who disseminate conspiracy theories often have this conspiratorial mindset. I guess suspicious minds is a way of presenting it. And usually these people live in information silos. They only communicate with one another, so we never hear about them. And if you tend to believe in one conspiracy theory, you'll tend to believe in others. They have difficulty determining what's fake news and true news. And as you mentioned, there is a narcissistic element to it. They believe they have special knowledge that the rest of us don't possess. Now, that's the hardcore conspiracy theorists. Now that we have social media and the internet, they're able to get their messages out broadly. Now, that wasn't the case, obviously, a century ago. But now they're able to get their messages out in the form of rumors. And they would often present their theories in a way of saying, I'm just asking, just saying, here's a possibility. And so they get that out. And so these become rumors. And people who aren't necessarily having that conspiratorial mindset, they want to try and make sense of the world. They hear about these conspiracy theories and start to wonder, oh, I wonder if there's something to that. And so this is how these theories get disseminated. Now, it's very hard to change the hardcore conspiracy theorists, because if you start arguing with them, let's say I start to argue with the conspiracy theorist and say, no, there's no evidence that the coronavirus is a bioweapon, they will start to say to me, you're part of the conspiracy, you're in on it. So you can't change them.
It's impossible to argue with somebody or to have a constructive conversation about it.
Exactly. But you can alter the opinions of people who aren't the hardcore conspiracy theorists, who've heard about it. The people who say, oh, I've heard it could be a bioweapon, I'm just wondering if it is. So for those people, you can persuade them with logic and science and information.
You've done so much research on this, and I want to talk a little bit about the growing numbers of vaccine hesitancy.
It's a really important issue. In fact, we've been studying vaccination hesitancy since February, since the very beginning of the pandemic, because we knew it would be a huge problem. Back in the 2009 so-called swine flu pandemic, vaccination hesitancy was a huge problem. About 50% of people did not get vaccinated, even though there was a vaccine available. So we know that vaccination hesitancy has always been a problem, and there has been a growing increase in anti-scientific attitudes in the community, where people tend to distrust more and more science and are less likely to get vaccinated. There are emergences of diseases that should not be breaking out. There have been outbreaks of measles in the past few years, all because parents aren't getting their children vaccinated. So there's already that anti-vax sentiment. And the people who are anti-vax tend to have one of a number of reasons for not wanting to get vaccinated. They think it's just a ploy by Big Pharma to generate revenue. They worry that the risks outweigh the benefits. They worry that as a government is not reporting in a transparent way the dangers. They have a preference for natural immunity. So those sorts of things as a background. Now, back in February, when we started doing our research on a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, we asked people, would you get vaccinated if one was available? And we found that 20% of Canadians and 25% of Americans said no. And they tended to be the people with pre-existing anti-vax attitudes. So in part, it's a carryover of the anti-vax attitudes of the past. Some of those attitudes are based on misinformation.
I have a lot more questions, Stephen, definitely. But I wanted to mention that you are supporting a nonprofit called Mosaic, and TELUS is trying to give back as much as possible in these hard times, and we want to give back to communities that you care about, our guests care about. And on behalf of the TELUS Talks podcast, we will be giving $500 to Mosaic, which is the Multilingual Orientation Service Association for Immigrant Communities, on your behalf. So we will make sure we do that for you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so when we talk about, the research of masks and not wearing masks, the research of vaccinations and who's scared of it, the research of, conspiracy theories and all of that, when did we become a lot of it sounds selfish. A lot of it sounds paranoid. And I'm just wondering, are we always like this? Or is it only in times of crisis, like a pandemic, that we're like this?
We always have that potential, but crises have the ability to bring out the best in people and the worst in people. And so if you look at panic buying, for example, Some people panic buying because they're terrified of getting infected. Some people out of a more selfish reason. Some people out of pure profiteering. So it brings out extremes in people.
Does it bring out the worst in people?
It brings out the worst and the best.
Right.
But remember, in previous pandemics and in this one, bad behavior has been relatively infrequent. Lootings and riotings and break-ins in stores, yes, they did occur. Boarded up stores in cities were targets of break-ins during this pandemic, but they were relatively rare compared to the rise of altruism. Not just the 7 p.m. cheer, but people getting out and offering to help one another in the communities, offering to deliver food to seniors who weren't able to shop for themselves. So it does bring out both, but we've been seeing that the rise of altruism seems to be way outweighed the bad behavior.
And you brought up social media.
Yeah.
Because I mean, a rumor, as you say, can spread on social media pretty quick. Whereas during the Spanish flu, it took a lot longer to, for a rumor to maybe come to your town or your city. And social media, again, I think it has its positives and negatives, especially when it comes to scientific information.
Absolutely. And this makes this pandemic different in some really important ways from previous pandemics or outbreaks. Even in 2009 with the so-called swine flu pandemic, today, the thing social media-wise is very different even from 10 years ago. We're digitally interconnected globally. Most people on the planet have access to the internet. Social media has such a higher prominence. So that has good and bad effects. The good effects is lockdown in 2020 is very different from lockdown in 1918. You were locked down in 1918 with your family. You didn't read a newspaper because no one was delivering newspapers. You were locked down. You are in social isolation. Here, 2020, we can be connected with other people. That's great. That's a positive. The downside is social media, because the users play a great role in disseminating news. They're able to forward or share particular news items. So you do tend to get the more sensational, distorted news circulated on social media, including the fake news or the viral images. And so that fuels things. So the whole thing of panic buying, for example, that whole thing was fueled in part by people forwarding images on social media of fights in grocery stores, of empty store shelves. And so social media and the internet, I guess, has made the same sorts of phenomena a century ago happen bigger and faster today.
It's interesting because I spent 22 years in news, and I was so the words fake news really bother me for obvious reasons, but also because I find that it's used as an excuse when somebody doesn't want to hear what the report is, what the scientific report is. So what is the psychology or the research behind this fake news phenomenon? I mean, there is a lot of fake news on social media.
Unfortunately, we live in an era where we've got deep fake technology and you've got trolls out there creating more and more convincing fake news. It does become difficult even for tech-savvy and sophisticated people to figure out, is this true or is this fake? So it's taken a bit of skepticism. So political leaders plus technology plus difficulties with media literacy, it's getting harder and harder to figure out what is true and what is fake.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we're all just too quick to forward something that we see, like, oh, we only read the headline, right? And then it's like, look at this. Can you believe it? And meanwhile, you're passing on something that hasn't been researched properly. It's not a real story. And, we're reacting to a headline. So let's try to end things on a happy note here. It's been fascinating. And like you said, it's really complicated and has so many layers to it. But what has your research shown? How are we with resilience?
That's the good news out of this pandemic. Although many people, and we're guessing maybe 10%, 15%, will develop important, serious, long-term psychological problems as a result of this pandemic that will merit psychological therapy or treatment, such as obsessive-compulsive disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. The good news is those people are in the minority and there are effective treatments for them. Most people are resilient. So most of us, we've gone through lockdown, we were stressed out, we might have been overeating, we might have been anxious, we had sleepless nights, irritable, depressed, but we'll recover from that when the pandemic is over. That's the good news. And it does get even better. Although this pandemic is very severe and lives have been lost and people have become very sick with long-term problems, that has happened. But for those people who haven't been impacted in that way, there have been some silver linings, and that's called post-traumatic growth. For some people, having gone through this pandemic, they've found that they've benefited in some ways. And our research suggests that roughly half of the people we've surveyed, and these have been healthy adults who've not contracted COVID-19, they're reporting things like, yeah, it's been tough, but as a result of going through this pandemic, I have a greater appreciation for friends and family. I have a greater appreciation for the little things in life that I took for granted previously, like going out to restaurants or hanging out with friends. I've had some people are reporting they've had a greater appreciation of their community. They say, well, I never realized this. My neighbors all come together when I needed help. And other people are saying that they've grown as a human being. They've become more resilient to stress. They've gone through something that hardly anyone has ever gone through before, lockdown and all these other sorts of measures. And they've realized, oh, wow, I was able to adapt to that. I didn't like it, but I adapted to it. And I've come through this as a stronger human being. So that's what we mean by growth. It's not simply going back to where you were before the pandemic. It's coming out of this as a better human being. So this is part of our ongoing research, but I think that's one of the silver linings out of this pandemic is that many people are coming out of this stronger than they were before.
Yeah, you hear about it a lot. People understanding how they are and how they appreciate even the little things like, just their being with their family and eating dinner together. And I guess, my last question, Stephen, is about what you just mentioned, how, people will be better, people will be all of those things. Sometimes, and I'm sure, obviously, you know this, and you've probably done tons of research on it, somebody will have a massive health scare, like, a massive heart attack or a stroke or a cancer. And it shakes you to your core. And I know this from personal experience. It shakes you to your core. I said things like, my perspective has changed. I'm a better person. I'm all of these things. And that was true. And then at some point, it kind of fades away and you find yourself going back to old ways. Do we, you know what I mean? Like, I've seen people that have had heart attacks who have quit smoking and then 3 years later, they start smoking again. Do we have the capacity to actually learn and change from this long term?
That's the big question.
Sorry. Sorry for that big question.
No, it's a really important question because what has happened in past pandemics, such as the Spanish flu, is it was largely forgotten. People had forgotten the lessons of the past. We do tend to be myopic. We do tend to focus on what's immediately in our faces. We do tend to forget the lessons of the past. And that's a very legitimate concern this time around. Yes, people have grown more resilient. We've learned how to come together as a community. And the big challenge now is to make that carry forward because we do have further challenges ahead. We have climate change and there will be more pandemics coming or more outbreaks. So I think that the big challenge that we've faced is to find ways of keeping these gifts or strengths going, of maintaining the resilience or maintaining the community resilience where we have that increase in altruism. That's the big challenge. And hopefully we can find ways of doing that.
I hope so. It's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time. I want to remind everyone that you can find more information about Dr. Taylor on his website, Dr. Stephen, that's with a V, Taylor.com. And his books are all there, including The Psychology of Pandemics. Thank you again, Dr. Taylor. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Tamara.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, TELUS.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.